Should I sit down? Or
Yeah, you can have a seat out there, and I'll give you the cue
all right,
when to come on back. Thanks, Billy. All right. Well, the song is probably a little bit of a cue as to what we're going to be talking about today. In fact, the title is Joyously Evolving because this past Thursday was the 206th birth date of Charles Darwin.
Whoa.
So there he is. Happy birthday, Charles Darwin. I decided to grow this beard. Seriously, I decided to grow this beard in honor of Charles Darwin. At least that's the excuse I'm using for this month. Okay, who learned about evolution in high school biology? Most everybody here, right? It's something everybody learns in high school and in college, and for most of us it's nothing controversial. In fact, evolution is something that's widely accepted as true among most of the developed world, and it's really the cornerstone of modern science. It led to just that one discovery and book by Charles Darwin. It led to the physical and social sciences, biology, geology, modern genetics, anthropology, and so on and so forth. And according to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, they tell us that the theory of evolution is one of the most strongly substantiated theories in modern science. It's the only scientifically accepted theory that both explains the amazing diversity of life on Earth today and provides a concrete explanation for why this diversity has changed throughout history. So, even though evolution is widely accepted around the world, we seem to have a little bit of a problem with it in this country. And I always like to check every year, I take an opportunity to check the latest poll results that show us American attitudes towards evolution. And in 2014, it was the usual mix of good news and bad news. All right, so here we have the results up here. And starting with the bad news, there are still around 42% of the population here that believes that God created human beings in our present form sometime within the last 10,000 years. Now, that's just a bit too close to 50% for comfort for me. And yet the good news is that it looks like that number has been on a slow and steady decline. And I'm frankly proud of the fact that Unity has always embraced evolution. This is what our co-founder Charles Fillmore had to say on the subject, and this is from back in 1939. Back in the 1920s and 30s, there were school teachers being put on trial for daring to try to teach evolution in schools. They were still trying to pass laws that would ban the teaching of evolution in our public schools. So here's what Charles Fillmore says on the subject. The history of mankind, in the majority of its aspects, shows a steady growth or ascent from a lower to a higher estate. In the forms of nature external to man, the same law of development is seen. Recognition of the truth that evolution in the earth is universal. So he was a man who was ahead of his time in embracing evolution. But here's the tricky part of evolution when it comes to human beings. We all know that evolution at the physical level is something that is very slow and gradual. It took hundreds of thousands of years for human beings, specifically for our brain, to evolve to the point where our brain power gave us that adaptive edge over other species on the planet. And we haven't changed very much physically in a long, long time. Consider just the past 5,000 years. Our physical brain structure hasn't changed all that radically, but look how far we've come in terms of knowledge and technology. It's amazing. I can pick up this small device, press a couple of buttons, and I can be connected to just about any other person on the planet. Not just being able to talk to them, but to actually be able to see each other video calls now. When I was 6 years old, something like this would have seemed like magic. And yet look what has happened in just our lifetimes, and imagine what can happen in just the span of another lifetime or so. Amazing, amazing things. So our highly evolved brains give us the ability to create technology like this, but here's the paradox. Here's the paradox. We have this highly evolved brain, and yet alongside that highly evolved brain is something that we might call our Stone Age brain. Scientists or neuroscientists, they talk about parts of the brain, and the neocortex is the part of us that is so evolved, that has given us language and the ability to engage in abstract thinking and things like that. But we still have the Stone Age brain in there, that part where all of our animal instincts and our drives and things like that still reside, they still operate, and they cause a lot of problems for us and the rest of the world. I like to use the example of nuclear power. Albert Einstein, he discovers the key to unleashing the power of the atom. Our advanced brain develops the knowledge and the technology, and the first thing that our Stone Age brain does with it is turn it into a weapon, right? That's how it works. So that's the issue here. That's the problem, so to speak. If we're so highly evolved, and if we can do all these marvelous things with science and technology, why haven't we figured out a way to be maybe a little less destructive? And on a less dramatic scale, why haven't we figured out how to establish and maintain relationships without a lot of drama and trauma? Why is it such a challenge to find a sense of meaning and purpose and some degree of happiness and contentment? Why do war and poverty have to be such seemingly insurmountable problems? You all have, I'm sure you've had the opportunity to hear Greg Tamlin. We've had him here several times. He's a singer-songwriter from Kansas City who I think is a comic genius, in my opinion. And a few years ago, he released a CD with the title Analog Brain in a Digital World. And there you have a modern cell phone with a picture of Greg Tamlin talking on one of those old-fashioned wooden wall phones like that. Analog Brain in a Digital World. And he wrote a song about it, and the song concludes with the line, "I've got bad news, your brain is outdated." Well, it may not be quite that dire, but again, there is this disconnect going on, and he's really onto something here. I've talked about the work of Michael Dowd and Connie Barlow before. Michael wrote a book called Thank God for Evolution. And here is his take on the paradox of having an analog brain in a digital world. He says this, he says, definition of a losing battle. Trying to significantly improve your life and relationships or grow spiritually without first appreciating, indeed honoring, your brain's physical, relational, and interpretive instincts. In other words, getting to know and appreciate the Stone Age brain. The key word there is instincts. Conditions in our lives, conditions in the world are not going to improve until we take charge of what it is that makes us tick. The more we can discover about how the brain operates and the nature of consciousness, the more that we start to see how we can begin to change those habitual patterns of behavior that come at us from the Stone Age part of the brain. Denying it doesn't help. It ain't going to go away, so we shouldn't even try. What we can best do is to get to know it. So we go about trying to create new patterns in the brain. And you'll hear neuroscientists, you'll hear them use terms like neuroplasticity and neural networks, but really all we need to know is that we have a significant degree of control over the process of creating new patterns. And a way of describing this process is conscious evolution. Conscious evolution. Things are moving too quickly. Our technology has become too advanced for us to simply be satisfied with going along for the ride. You know, it's great. We hear that term, oh, just go with the flow. Well, yeah, going with the flow is a wonderful, wonderful thing, provided we're on a lazy river riding on an inner tube. The problem is that contemporary life is more like whitewater rafting. How many of you have been whitewater rafting? Now, you know how that works. You will go with the flow, right? I mean, there is no denying it. And you will use your paddle to steer away from the boulders and to steer a safe course through the rapids. Going with the flow and steering are not mutually exclusive. You can go with the flow and paddle away from the rocks, so to speak. So over the years, we've worked with several books by Unity minister Robert Brummett. He was one of our instructors when Karen and I attended Unity Institute, and he wrote a book all about this thing we call conscious evolution. The book is called Birthing a Greater Reality, A Guide to Conscious Evolution. We used it as our fall series here about 4 years ago or so. And he gives us some practical guidelines about how to go about helping along this process of creating new patterns and guiding our conscious evolution. And the two guidelines he gives us that we're going to work with today: make friends with paradox and cultivate attention and intention. So, making friends with paradox. The Stone Age brain loves to think of things in terms of black and white, either or. Now, that's a wonderful instinct that helps us survive in the jungle, and it's also the same thing that wants to try to turn everything into a weapon, because that's the first place it goes, either or, black or white. The instinct is always going to be there, and we have to make friends with it. That means we have to stop seeing life as an either-or proposition. I was listening to the lyrics of the song that Billy was sharing before, Joyously Evolving, talking about, it isn't good or bad, it isn't good or evil, we're just evolving, right? Getting out of that mindset that says that it has to be one thing and never the other. We have to stop seeing life as an either-or proposition. And I have to confess that we've got a little remedial work to do in Unity, because you will still hear talk about how we need to live in the absolute realm, as if there's something wrong with the relative, or that we can't trust the five senses, that the material world is an illusion. Or here's my favorite: we have to get out of our heads and into our hearts. Stuff needs to stop. We need to evolve beyond that kind of black and white thinking. Making friends with paradox means we entertain the possibility of a third way that takes us beyond either or black and white and into the realm of this and. Absolute, relative, spiritual, material, head, heart, they're not mutually exclusive. They're like opposite sides of the same coin. We need both. When we engage in that kind of either-or thinking, we're actually limiting ourselves. We're cutting off an entire realm of possibilities. So making friends with paradox opens us up to a richer and a deeper experience of life that's filled with an abundance of new possibilities that we tend to shut off by either-or thinking. And Jesus was a master of doing this. He was a master of working with and making friends with paradox. You remember, he would say things like, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. Paradox. Sounds mutually exclusive. Or how about this? If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you let go of life, then you will attain life. That does not mean that we should strive to be last or throw our lives away. That's the primitive brain at work, trying to take everything literally and turn it into an either-or proposition. The primitive brain sees an obstacle, and all it knows what to do is to try to cut through it, blow it up, tear it down, get it out of the way. Evolved consciousness looks at other possibilities, such as go around it, go over it, go under it, or how about the possibility that what we think is an obstacle isn't really an obstacle at all. Opens up so many more possibilities when we make friends with paradox. The second guideline for conscious evolutionaries is to cultivate the power of attention and intention. And attention is really about mindfulness, and that's a skill that we develop with our meditation practice. Mindfulness is what helps us to overcome our tendency to be slaves to those animal impulses that come to us from the Stone Age brain. Robert uses the example of anger in the book, something that, if we're human and honest with ourselves, we experience from time to time to time to time. When the anger arises, though, and this is the question, when the anger arises, are we aware of the anger as it's arising? Or do we find ourselves identifying with it and thereby becoming the anger and thereby becoming angry? In other words, it translates into our thoughts, our words, and our actions without any kind of intermediate thought or awareness. And there's a huge difference between being aware of anger and identifying with it. When we identify with it and act on it, what we usually do is to make up a story to justify the words and the actions that flow from that experience. And then we may go so far as to enroll other people in supporting our story. It might go something like this. Did you see what he did? Did you see what he did? That was so terrible. Don't you agree? But boy, did I give him a piece of my mind. He'll think twice before he does that again, right? Look what we've done. We've just made ourselves the hero in our own little anger story. And when we do that, all we succeed in doing is to pave the way for that same thing to happen over and over and over again. And that's actually what we're teaching other people when we do that. Our actions and the way we show up in the world, that's a powerful method of teaching. And that's something we probably don't want to teach. And it starts with attention and then intention. We can't be happy and identified with anger all at the same time, but we can become aware of it and then choose not to act on it. We can choose not to create a story to justify the anger. We can choose not to try to enroll others in our story supporting our anger. Mindfulness practice increases our capacity to be attentive and aware in the midst of all sorts of internal and external distractions. And that's why it's so important, practical, and useful. And the reason attention and intention go together is because of the way that they function, the way they support each other. Attention is focused awareness. Intention is like a compass needle that points us in a certain direction. So attention tells us that there are 4 directions that we can take, and intention allows us to choose which of those paths we want to follow, to choose the path that points toward creating greater peace and harmony instead of just more anger and strife and chaos in the world. So, those are all products of evolution. Evolution is a wonderful thing. And once more, Charles Darwin, we salute you as he celebrates his birthday there. I'm grateful to Charles Darwin and really to many others who are helping us to understand more and more about how the universe works and more about how evolution works, and especially this idea that evolution is something that happens to us, but it's also something that we need to that we need to, that we have the privilege and the responsibility of engaging intentionally in order to really co-create that world that works for all, which is our big vision and unity. So, see you next week.